Hi everyone, I welcome you all into this Dell Boomi session. So in the last session, we talked about a very important shape, and which one was that? Process root shape, right? We try to understand the difference between process call shape and the process root shape. So in which scenarios will you prefer the process route shape over a process call shape?
When the processes and the sub-process are tightly coupled.
No, when they are loosely coupled, we prefer process route.
And tightly we use process. When they are tightly coupled, we should use process route shape, and loosely coupled we should use process call shape.
Actually, it is other way around.
Yeah.
So when we want loose coupling, right? Loose coupling means when the two processes are not dependent on each other.
Oh yeah.
Then we use process root shape, right? And when we want the both the processes, main process and the sub process, to be dependent on each other, right? Then we use a process call shape. And process root shape internally refers a component, right? Which component is that?
Process root component.
Process root component. It internally refers a process root component. So process root shape itself will have two tabs. One is general tab and another is routing parameter, right? In that routing parameter, what do we define? The parameter on the basis of which you will do the whole routing, right? So yesterday when we took an example, we defined over here location, right? Again, in the process root component, there are two tabs, right? One was a general tab and another one was which one?
Process routing.
Yeah, process routing. Very nice. So we have one more, process routing. So in the general tab, we have two options, right? What are those? Whether we want data pass through to be enabled or not. That is one. And which is the second one? Return paths. Return paths. We define here return paths, right? So until you define the return paths, you cannot get back the data or the document from the sub-process back to the main process, right? So you must define the return paths to get the data back from the sub-process back to the main process, right? So apart from this, there is another tab called as process routing. What happens in the process routing?
Here we define the keys.
Yes, we defined it. So we define kind of different possible values of routing parameter, isn't it?
Yes.
Different possible values of the routing parameter and the different sub-processes to be called for each of the possible values, right? So you define over there that one, and one more important thing you do is you do a mapping between the return path of the individual sub-process and the return path of
values
process root component, right? So what you're doing over here in this section, if you remember, you do a mapping, right? What kind of mapping you do? Let me show you so that you guys can recall. So let's start from here. So this is a process route shape, general tab and route parameters tab, right? Can we have more than one route parameters? Can we have a combination?
Yes.
Yes, we can have. Then what we do, we get into the process route component. Here, two tabs, general tab, process routing tab, right? In general tab, how many options? Two options. One is pass through and another is configure return paths, right? We can have n number of return paths, right? Then the second option is process routing, where you define that for which value of that parameter, which specific sub-process will get called, right? For here, location is equal to US, there is a sub-process pertaining to that. For location is equal to UK, there is a sub process pertaining to that. And another thing is there is return path mapping. That's what I was telling. So here, how you're doing the mapping? You're doing the return path mapping for your process route component and your sub processes, right? Yes or no? So in your process route component, you define some return paths, and your sub process may have a return map. Sub process may have some return paths. So the mapping is done for both of them, and that's how you get to know when the response is returned or when the document is returned by the sub process, in which specific return path will you get the document. Are you guys following it? We tried to execute it with multiple different types of inputs, right? When the control will go to this default branch?
When it doesn't fulfill the condition, like it doesn't have any location, like different from the what we have defined.
Correct. So when it does not find any matching value or matching key defined in the process root component, right, under the process routing section, right? So right now we have taken care of two keys. What are those? US and UK, right? So if you give any location other than this, yeah, if you give any location other than this, then the control will go to the default branch, right? And what does these branches indicate? These are the return paths we have defined, isn't it? So when we are working using a process root component or a process root shape, how do we manage the extensions of a main process and the sub process?
Individually.
We manage them individually because these are not dependent on each other.
Tightly
These are
coupled,
kind of
yeah.
completely independent, right? And when we use a process call shape, then we manage it via main process itself,
Process.
right? So when we are using a process call shape, do we need to deploy the process individually?
Yes.
No.
All the three
No.
should be
No.
the process
No.
route
When
we have
we
to do together.
My
in
question
process
is,
call shape, yeah, in
for
process call
process call
shape,
shape, do we need the main process and the sub process to be deployed individually for the process call shape?
No, no.
No, right?
Only
We,
main process if we deploy, it is over.
yes. If we deploy the main process, the deployment of the sub process is by default taken care, right? Whereas when you're working using a process root component, then you have to do it individually, right? All right. So I think we are good so far. We'll take a step ahead, right? So we have been talking about the different shapes, right? So if you go back now to the logic category, have we covered branch shape? Yes. Root, yes. Cleanse, yes. Decision, yes. Exception shape, no. Stop shape, yes. Return document shape, yes. Flow control, no. Business rules, yes. Try catch, more or less, yes. So how many shapes have we not covered so far in logic? Only two, right? Yes. And if we go to the execute category, do you know what does map shape do? Yes. Do you know what does set property shape do? Yes. Message shape, yes. Notify, yes. Program command, yes. Process call, yes. Process route, yes. Data process, yes. So which one is left? Only find changes, right? So what point I'm trying to say is, like, we have covered majority of the shapes, right? So you can do a lot of things with these shapes if you use them properly, right? Especially one shape which is very, very important and people don't realize the importance is cache. Okay. At the cache component is very, very important component when you're working on real-time projects. That will play an immense role while you want to establish a relationship between the two different data sets, and when you want to map the data from two different data sets into a single data set, right? So please look into that. We'll continue from here. And today I want to first of all talk about integration with AWS S3. Okay. Important integration. These days you will find a lot of use cases where the integration with AWS S3 is done, right? So important to know. Anybody has idea what does S3 mean? Okay. So anybody know what is AWS? What does AWS stand for?
Amazon Web Service.
Yes, very nice. It stands for Amazon Web Service. So AWS, right, offers lot of different services on the cloud, right? Lot of services on the cloud. And one of the services is S3. There are so many other services like SNS, SQS, and apart from this also there are a lot of services. So S3 stands for Simple Storage Services. Okay. So whenever we are working with different organizations, right, they need some kind of mechanism where they can store the bulk data, the documents, or maybe the invoices. Okay. A- I mean, we some kind of a place where they can have all their documents stored. Okay. Kind of a document management system where they can completely store and manage their documents, right? So now there are different offerings in the market around that. Okay. So some people use S3, some people use Box, right? Some people use Google Drive, right? Some people use SharePoint. Okay. SharePoint definitely has more features than only storing the data, right? But we can use these different offerings to store the bulk amount of data to manage all your files from a single place, right? So many of the organizations use S3, which is called as a simple storage service to store the data, right? So it's pretty simple. There is nothing tough, right? So all of us have been using Google Drive, right? Yes, all of us have been using the Google Drive. So in Google Drive, typically what we create is we create a folder, right? And within folder, we'll store uh, we'll store some different files, right? We can have subfolders, we can have files, and all that kind of stuff, right? So now what happens over here is in S3, understand this important to in S3, the information is stored, the information is stored in different buckets. Okay. So whenever you're working on S3, so S3 is an offering by AWS, right? To store the data. Now this data will be not directly stored in S3, but first of all, some buckets will be created. Okay. What will be created? Buckets, right? So these buckets may have different set of permissions, right? So for example, some of the buckets may have only read only permission. Some of the buckets will allow you to write also all that stuff of stuff. Some buckets will be only accessible in a particular geographical location. So there are a lot of configurations which can be done around these buckets, right? Maybe you want to have the download rights on the buckets, or you will have only view rights. So there are a lot of configurations which we can do. And within bucket, so each bucket will have some ARN. Okay, what is ARN? It is a unique name for each Amazon resource. Okay, so it is an Amazon resource. So it is kind of an Amazon resource name. Each bucket will have a unique ARN, right? It will have some kind of a geographical location, right? Where this bucket is kind of hosted. And post that, once you have that, then in each bucket, you can create folders, subfolders, or you can even directly push the files. Okay, or even you can directly push the files. So what I'm trying to explain you over here is that AWS has got an offering called as S3, which stands for Simple Storage Service, that allows you to push the data, right? And how do you push the data? First, you create buckets, and within buckets, you will have your data, right? So now to get this AWS, so we should have, first of all, AWS subscription. We should have AWS subscription. So it is free of cost, but the only caveat is that you should have a credit card to create a, you should have a credit card to create a trial account. Okay. So now let's say I want to create a trial account. I will go here. I'll write AWS portal login. Okay, so there is something called as AWS management console. Okay, for example, you do not have an account. You can write here and you can say create a free account. Okay, it is bringing up us to AWS console sign up. Yes or no? So we'll add that link over here so that it is easy for you guys.
In real time we will use AWS or no?
What is your question? I didn't get it.
In real time we'll store the data in AWS or not?
Yeah, of course. I have worked on a couple of projects where like in one of the projects we were storing all the invoices on AWS. So even now when you're working on a lot of e-commerce sites, right, and when you access your invoices, many of them will not be storing because these are bulky data. Okay, so you just think of any site like Amazon, right? How many invoices they must be generating every day, right? Lakhs of invoices, right?
Yes.
So so every day lakhs of invoices and they have to maintain, so they need a place where they can manage them effectively and which is not so costly also. So it might happen that internally they are also using S3 for storing those invoices. Okay.
Okay.
So yes, it is definitely used in real time. Okay, there's no doubt about that. It is a very famous storage house these days. Okay, so here you can create your account. Okay, so my account, let me try with this account name. So this is step 1 of 5. It will take me to the next. So I'll have to give my details and you can try it out. You can create a personal account and you can create next. And then it will ask you the credit card details also. Okay. So you might need to give your credit card details to create an account for yourself, right? Please do not share those account details with anyone, right? Because if somebody subscribes the wrong services and all, you might be charged for it. Okay. So be a little bit careful, but this S3 and all are free. Okay. So do not try any bulky operations, but yeah, you can like try many operations. They will not charge you. So now what I'll do is I'll get into my account. Okay. So how do I get into my account? I'll just click over here, AWS management console. I think this is already, yeah, this is routing me to that one. So I already have one account created for me. Okay, so I think all of us will have to create our own accounts. This cannot be shared across. So we have something called as a root user, and for me, the root user is this. Okay, don't try to use my account, guys. Okay, so here we have to give the password. Okay, so I log in into my account, right? So this is AWS management console. So from here, you can manage all the different services which AWS offers. I'm not sure if you have seen this in past. So if you have seen it, fantastic. If you have not seen, let's look into this now. Right. So here there is a section called as AWS services. Within this section, you can see there are a lot of services, right? So there are services related to the computation, there are container-based services, services for management and governance, services for security. Do you see services for storage also? Services for database, service media services, cost management, front-end services. So you can see how many services we have right under AWS. I think many of us might not even think that we may have these many services for AWS, right? And they're maintaining all of these. So now the which one do we need to get into? Storage one, and in storage we are using S3. What does S3 stand for? Simple storage service.
Sumit, I have one question. What is a root user and that who is that I am?
Which one?
What do you mean by root user and other user I am?
I think within my user, I can create other users also, okay, which will have access. So for example, my user has access to everything, but I can create a few other users which are created by their offering called as identity access management. And those are like IAM users.
Okay.
Okay. So now if you see here, I already have some buckets. Maybe I did for some of my previous batches. So you cannot push anything directly. So right now we are into S3. So they changed the UI few days back. I mean, few months back. That's fine. So here we have to create a bucket. So now when you're working on a real-time project, okay, you don't need to bother about all these things. You are not going to do this, any of these. You will just do the Boomi part. The reason why I'm showing you this part is so that when you go to any interview and all, right, you can cook up a story. And you can only cook up a story when you see all these things, right? If I just speak all these things theoretically, you will just imagine things, but you cannot correlate what I exactly it means, right? So we'll start with a bucket. So we'll say Boomi April batch bucket, something like this. Okay. So bucket will have some naming conventions. You cannot give spaces and all, which is fine. Bucket names must be unique, must not contain spaces or the uppercase characters, right? So there are different regions which you can select. So we'll select US West 1. Yeah. And copy settings from the existing bucket. So we will, so there is an option block all public access, turning the setting is same as on. So there are certain settings. I think AWS experts will know it better. Okay, we will keep all settings default for now. Okay, we just give the bucket name. We selected the AWS region, and as I was telling, there are a lot of settings which can be done around the bucket, right? So we'll keep it as is, and we'll say create bucket. So AWS experts would know about these settings better. Even they have got a documentation which you can go through if you want to know things in more detail. But that's fine for now. I don't think we need to get into all that stuff for now. We'll focus on things which are more relevant for us. Can you see a bucket got created? Boomi April batch bucket. Yes. So now do you see here there are options to create folders and all? So I say create folder. Let's say there is a folder, test folder. All right. So there is something called server side encryption, decryption, right? So which means when you're talking or when you're trying to push anything into this date folder, so do you want any kind of encryption mechanism to be adopted? For now, I have disabled it. So you can see there is a folder test, right? And within that, you can upload the stuff. So it is not necessary that we use S3 with Boomi only, right? We can upload things straight away also. So let's say I want to upload, I can upload folders and files. I go to add files. I will just upload any file for that matter right now. Yeah. I will just go here and I will just find the file, some meeting notes. Okay. And there's an option upload. The information below, blah, 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 upload succeeded. So now can you see that text file got uploaded? Yes or no? So this is my file. You can click on that. So it is as good as pushing the things into your Google Drive. Okay. I'll not open that file. It may have my some confidential data, but yeah, it was getting opened up. So the point I'm trying to convey over here is that it is pretty simple to use. Pretty much it works the same way as your Google Drive works, right? Not exactly same, but yeah, more or less same. So here is your file. Let's say I want to go and delete it. I can. Deleting the specified objects cannot be undone. I think I'm fine with that. I don't know why don't I get the option to delete. Okay, I think it is asking permanent delete objects. To confirm deletion, type permanent delete. Okay, that's why I was not getting it. And now I can delete the object. Okay, so whatever file we pushed, that is called as an object. Any questions so far?
So this you told that we can give permissions to bucket. So how can we?
That is not my thing. I mean, that for that you
Okay.
have to subscribe for AWS course for someone. Okay.
Okay.
Even I, so this all you won't even need to touch. Okay, so people will create a bucket for you. They will give you the bucket name and some kind of credentials which will help you to connect with that bucket. That's all. Okay, these all details you will not even get to see. Okay, so so whenever you want to connect with these buckets to see whether your data got uploaded or not, typically they will not give you the access to this management console. You will have to use something called as S3 browser. Okay, so there are some tools with there are some S3 browsers in the market. You can use those S3 browsers to check the different files in different buckets. Okay, it is not necessary that they will give you the access to this AWS management console. This is one way where you can use your Google Chrome browser or any other web-based browser to check your files and all. But then there is another browser which is called as S3 browser, and using that S3 browser you can navigate and check the different files. Okay, in majority of the projects you will be provided with that only. Okay, so now the question is, like in my some of the previous videos I showed an example where we were reading an attachment from the Salesforce and we were pushing it to the uh, S3 and whatever is the attachment URL. So whenever we push any file into S3, each file will have some unique URL. Okay, and that unique URL will be used to access it at a later stage. So what happens is, like in real time, I'm just telling a real time use case. Uh, Attachments can be stored in Salesforce also. Okay, uh, but then storing the attachments in the Salesforce is an expensive affair to have. It costs the companies too much to store the data or to store the attachments in Salesforce. They charge much more than S3. So many of the companies, what do they do is they initially get their attachment in Salesforce, right? So for example, I have a sales team. Okay, so they want to attach some attachments to Salesforce. They will allow it because some amount of storage will come free in Salesforce, and after that you are charged for that. Once that attachment is there, maybe some integration will run that will read that attachment from the Salesforce, that will push that attachment to S3, and the S3 URL is returned back to the Salesforce and it is updated over there. And whenever some salesperson or any user wants to access that attachment, they will click on that URL, which will internally get routed to the S3, and from there they can access those attachments. Yeah. So that's how it's gonna work. So we will see how to just do the integration with S3. So what we'll do is we'll create a new folder. We are working on which one? This one, right? So we'll create a new folder over here, AWS. Okay, I have one more set of videos where I have shown integration with different end systems. So if you guys want to have the access to that, just drop me a note. So there I have shown integration with S3, SNS, I mean many applications for that matter. Okay. So in case you want to have access to that, some of you might be already having the access, but yeah, if in case you want to have access, I'll give you the access. So we'll get into the AWS. We'll start with a new component and we will start with a process, right? So we are trying to do integration with S3. All right. So I start with a star shape of no data type. Okay. So if you go to the D drive, right? So we have a lot of files over here lying, right? Accounts revenue file is one of the files. Let's say we have to read this file and we have to push to the S3. How can we do that? For reading the file, what do we need?
Disconnector.
Yes, we need a disconnector. We need a disconnector. We have to reuse the connection. So connection is not pointing anywhere right now. That's fine. And what is the operation? You have to read a file. What is the name of the file you have to read? Accounts revenue, right? I'll just copy the name. So I'll just write accounts revenue.xml. Save and close. And now it's done, right? And if I have to test it out, what I have to do before I test it out? I have to enable extensions, right? And here I have to check the directory part. Yes or no? Why do I need to do that? Because I'm forcing to use the extension, right? So how can you force? Either you give some dummy name or you just leave the connection details empty. That's all. Then you're forced to use that, right? So here I'll use some atom. I will use test extensions. I'll use, did I save it? Yeah, sometimes it takes time, okay, for that to get populated. Let's wait. Can you see? You can come over here and overwrite it. I think we have covered this few times already, so you must have an idea. Okay, so we are able to read the file. Awesome. So now this file eventually is required to be uploaded into the AWS S3 bucket. All right. So how do we do that, guys? We need to find if we have any connectors to AWS or S3. Do we have? Yes. There is Amazon S3 and there is Amazon S3 REST. Amazon S3 REST is the more advanced one, which has more features, and it is based on which APIs internally? REST APIs. Okay. So for all the integrations we do with the cloud-based applications, right? This AWS is cloud-based, isn't it? So all these integrations typically behind the scene happens via APIs, So this connector, whatever we are seeing today, right? This internally is using the APIs of S3. Which kind of APIs? REST APIs. But they have kind of abstracted those details from us and they came up with a connector so that we don't need to worry which API to call and all. They will automatically take care of it. What we need to do is we just need to do the configurations. That's all. So here, what is the action you want to do? Upsert, right? Isn't it? You don't want to delete, you don't want to get, you don't want to query, select, you want to upsert. So now when you want to upsert, is it asking you some connection details, access key and the secret key? Do you have any access key or the secret key? No, right? So who will provide you this? AWS team is going to provide you this. Okay. AWS team is going to provide you this. If at all you are creating your own subscription, how do you get this? You go to this one here. There will be something like my security credentials. Okay, there will be something like access keys, right? You can create a new key or all that stuff, right? So if you want to make this one as active, let's say I want to make one of them as active. This is activated. How do I access it? So this is the access key. Okay, I need to have the secret key also. Okay, let me delete it for that matter. Let me delete it. That's fine. To confirm deletion, enter the access key ID. Okay, because at a time I think I can create only two, so I can create a new access key now. Okay, so here I have my access key. Yes, which I can directly straight away go and enter over here, and I have my secret key also. Yeah, I'll just download the key file for later use. Okay, there you will have your secret. Apply, save. I will test the connection. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to use an access key and a secret key, and I'm just trying to check with that access key and the secret key, can I establish the connectivity with AWS? If yes, then I will go and configure the operation to basically upload some file to S3 bucket. All right, the connection is successful. That means this access key and the secret key is working fine. Please do not try to use any of my keys, any of my credentials. I'll deactivate all this right after the session. So connection part is done. Now next thing is operation. Okay. So if you see the connector action is upsert, then there is error behavior, return application responses. Do you want to tag your documents? This is the size, and this is about the encryption. Okay, so this encryption was not there in the previous connector. This has been recently added in the new connector, encryption and encryption key, but we did not enable any kind of encryption. Then this region capability to detect the region automatically also came now. Earlier you had to manually select it. So what you have to do is just you have to start hitting on import. That's all. So you have to select a connection. Yes, this is the connection which you configured, and you can just hit next straight away. So what you're trying to do right now over here is using the connection details, you're trying to basically find the different object types. Do you have different operations over here or different objects over here? Can you find the bucket which you created? Yes.
Yes.
But let's say this bucket might change from one environment to another. This bucket might change from one environment to another. So in that case, so let's say right now I'm working on the dev environment, then the name is Boomi April batch bucket. But when I move to my higher environments, the bucket name might change. If that is going to happen, then in that case, you have to choose which bucket? You have to choose a dynamic bucket. Okay. Which bucket you have to choose, guys? You have to choose a dynamic bucket, right? So right now, let's say I want to choose my bucket name is this one, right? What is the name? Let's make a note of it. Even we can, I think we can get it from here also for that matter. But if you want, you can copy from here also. Boomi April batch bucket, right? So it is Boomi APR batch bucket, right? This is my bucket where we are trying to push the data. So you can straight away go and select this bucket, but in real time, it might happen that your bucket name is going to change from one environment to another. And that if that is going to happen, you cannot go and change your code, right? Every time. What you will have to choose, you will have to choose dynamic bucket and you say next and finish, right? You say next and finish. And what is the object name? Dynamic bucket, right? Save and close. All right. So now when you did so, you have to somewhere pass the bucket name, isn't it? You have to somewhere pass the bucket name, because if you do not pass the bucket name, how will it know at the runtime that which bucket to use, right? So here there is a shape which helps you to take care of that, and that is set property shape. I'll use a set property shape right before the AWS S3 REST connector. We'll say the properties. Which property do we need? Document property, which connector? Amazon S3 REST. Please make sure you select the right connector. Yes, Amazon S3 REST. Which property?
Bucket.
Here you have a property bucket, and here you have to give the bucket name. Do we know the bucket name? But if I hard code this bucket name here like this, for example, if I hard code this one like this, then in that case, does it become loosely coupled? When I say loosely coupled, can I change the name of the bucket from one environment to another without making the changes in the code?
No.
No, right? Because I'm hard coding the bucket name over here. So then when I move from one environment to another, I will have to come to the set property shape and I'll have to change the code, which is not good, right? If that was supposed to happen, I could select the bucket name while configuring the operation itself, right? Why to create all these things? So ideally, this bucket name should come from property. Okay. So one option is you can use which property? You can use dynamic process property. Yes, you can create some dynamic process property. For example, DPP underscore bucket name. Okay. Then you can add one more property. What is that? Connector is fine. AWS S3 REST is also fine. The file name, right? Have we specified what would be the file name? No, right? So how do we get the file name, guys? One thing is we hard code it, right? One thing is we can hard code it, right? But then we don't know. Different times there might be different files, right? So we can get it from
Document property.
document property. And what document property will that be?
Disk.
Disk and file name.
Very nice. Disk and file name. Very good. So it will be disk and file name. So for the file name, we are getting the value from this property. Why we are getting from this property? Because we are using disk connector over here to read the file, right? And that should have the file name in a property called as file name, which is under the document property. And for bucket name, I'm trying to get it from the dynamic process property, right? Now, if I want to use this dynamic process property, I have to set it somewhere, right? Have I set this dynamic process property anywhere in the code so far?
Extensions you can.
So right now I haven't set it. So I can go to the extensions. I can go to the dynamic process property, and here, oh, this is my bucket name. Okay, so I don't have to give the bucket name, but I have to give the name of the dynamic process property. So whenever you're working on the dynamic process property, just make sure the spelling mistakes are not there, case things are taken care. So I always prefer to do a copy paste. So I'll go to the extensions. I'll say dynamic process property, add this. So we have just added this into extensions, and while you execute it, right, while you test it out, go to the extensions under dynamic process property, give that bucket name, run the test. So this REST connector, Amazon S3 REST connector, is internally calling the REST APIs exposed by AWS S3 to push this file into a bucket. Okay, and we get everything working successfully. We go to the stop shape and we see what is the response. We get the bucket name back and we get the file key, isn't it? So now we go back. So can you see file key, how we get accounts revenue.xml? Because if you remember, we had set the file name, right? So we'll go here, we'll get into which bucket? This is the bucket, right, which we are using. You just refresh. Can you see one file, accounts revenues.xml? Yes. So that means your integration with S3 bucket is working absolutely fine. Yes or no? And as I was telling you, there is an object URL, right? For each object, there is a URL. Can you see this is the URL for your object? So this URL will help to you to access this specific object. Right now, what it is saying, access denied, because there are some settings which are stopping you from accessing it. And the reason why it is not accessible like this, because when I created this bucket, I had stopped that public access. Okay. So that's why you cannot access it directly with the URL, but then that you can enable it. So AWS team will take care of that. So you can set different configurations. For example, this URL should be accessible to all the users of your company, or let's say this URL should be accessible on in only in the particular geographical location, or it should be accessible to all. So those all things can be managed by them, right? This is pretty simple, right? I mean, we went to the set property shape, we use bucket name, we use this. Now this bucket name, right? It can be easily changed from environment to environment, right? Because we kind of made it configurable. This could also be made configurable. Instead of using dynamic process property, right? We could also use a process property. So far we have not used the process property. Okay, we have always used dynamic process property only. Okay, there is another important concept called as process property. The first and the foremost difference between process property and dynamic process property is process property is a component. Process property is a component. So now what I'm trying to say is I could store this bucket values or the bucket names in a process property also. So let's say I create a process property with the name. Okay, so let's say this property is S3 bucket. Okay, now in this S3 bucket, I can define n number of properties. So within a single process property component, can you define multiple key value pairs? Answer is yes. So let's say this is one. I can have the data types. So let's say the data type is string. I can have the value. Okay, let's say my value is this one. Similarly, you can, for example, let's say you want to store the file name also from here, right? Or maybe the folder name for that matter, right? So what is my folder name here? Let's say if I want to push the file to a specific folder, did we have any folder over here? We created one folder, right? Which one was that? Test folder, right? So let's say this is my bucket name, or else I can give the more better name, let's say S3 bucket, and I can give some default values. Yeah, I can also select what are the allowed values we have. Allowed values will come into the picture when you are trying to set the value of the process, to set the value of the process property. Let's say here I can have S3 folder name. Let me delete this. So the point I'm trying to say is that there is another mechanism to store process level properties, and that is using a process property component. Now process property, first of all, is a component, whereas dynamic process property is not a component. Since process property is a component, this component can be reused across n number of processes. Yes or no? Let's say if I need S3 details in 10 different processes, right? So instead of dynamic process property, which one should I use? I should use process property because this single process property can be accessible in 10 different processes, but dynamic process property is restricted to the specific process only. Are you guys understanding this? The dynamic process property which I created just some time back, even that was fine, but the only downside of that was that was accessible only in this process, right? But let's say I have a scenario wherein I will need to access this S3 bucket multiple times, right? Or I have 10 different processes. So in each process, I will have to create a S3 bucket related property. Instead of doing that, create a process property because it is accessible across n number of processes, right? So this is another difference. PP is accessible across n number of processes. Why it is accessible across n number of processes? Because it is a component, right? It is a component. Another important note is PP supports different data types, whereas DPP stores everything as string, right? PP allows us to store multiple key value pairs, isn't it? Whereas with DPP, we can store only one key value pair, right? Isn't it? If we want to store more, we need more DPPs, isn't it? PP allows us to set the possible values a PP can have, whereas we don't have any such configurations in DPP. So what I'm trying to say is, so here there is a section called as allowed values. Okay, so you might get confused, but understand this. There are two things which we can do with these properties. We can get their values and we can set the values. Now, if you say, let's say the allowed values is only, I'm just giving an example. The allowed values, not this one. Let's say test for that matter. So what you are trying to do is you're trying to convert it into a enum. You're trying to convert into a enum. What is enum, guys? Enum is a kind of a data type where you restrict the values to some specified values only. Okay. For example, you go to McD's and you want to order a burger, right? So they will ask you, maybe probably not burger. Let's say you want to order a Coke for yourself. So they will ask small, medium, large. Okay. Do they have any other option? Or maybe they have extra large. I don't know. But they will give you some specified options and you have to choose one among those, right? You cannot say I want 200 ml or 250 ml. They have their own categorization, right? So when you want to restrict a user to choose one of the values out of the multiple values which you have defined, or you can think of it like a drop down, then this allowed values is helpful. So when you want that anybody while using this process property key value pair should only be able to set these values only, then you can set the allows values. The moment I use allowed values, this default value got converted into a drop down. Yes or no? So let's say I add one more, S1. So that means these are the only two possible values of folder name. Okay, I'll remove it for now. So this is bucket name, this is folder name, right? Save and close, save. Another advantage of using this is, another advantage of using process properties, you don't have to type and all. Okay, there is a drop down, you can select the properties. So there you had to type the property name, right? When you were using a dynamic process property, isn't it? So when you're typing it manually, it is always risky. There can be some spelling mistakes, there can be mistakes related to casing. So that's why process property is much better than that. The only downside of process property is that if you use process property, it might take little more execution time than your dynamic process property. But otherwise, process property is definitely more easily manageable. So whenever you have a use case wherein you want to use same property across n number of processes, wherever you have some lot of details to be stored pertaining to a connector, right? For example, we were using a mail connector, right? Now pertaining to a mail connector, you have to store the subject, you have to store the mail ID, to mail, from email, body. Let's say you have so many things to be stored. So instead of creating a lot of dynamic process property, you can create a single process property, and within that you can have multiple key value pairs. Yes. And are process properties extensible? Yes, it is. Process properties are also extensible. So what I've done is I'm using the process property as this one, file name, and I'll add one more. And which one will that be? This time I want to also set the folder. So where should I get the folder value from? I should get it from process property, the one which we created just some time back. Yes or no? Now, if you go to the extensions, process properties, you have kind of extended both the bucket name and the folder name, right? So this is your property. This is your process property component within which you have different keys. So these are the two keys you have. You save it, you test it out. Now, when you want to test it out, you can set the values for this. What are the values for this? Boomi, April, batch, bucket, test. Where are these values coming from? When you define this process property, you had set some default values, right? Isn't it? That's where it comes from. If you want to override those, you can do like this. If you don't want to override, let us leave it like this. And you can run the test. So this time we have given the bucket name, we have given the folder name also. We see what is returned back from the S3 connector. So can you see in the file key, we have the folder name also prepended? Yes or no? So now we go back here. We get into the test one. And here we'll see the file. Yes. So that means we have been able to upload the file. We have been able to use the process property. Now, another important thing, let's say I want to create a package out of this. I created a package. I'll close it. I'll straight away come to the packaged components. Okay, I'm showing this step a little faster because we have already seen it yesterday multiple times. We'll say packaged component details, included components. Okay, included components. So do you see a component called as process property here? We have S3 bucket, operation, connection, disk, Amazon S3 upsert response, and this is your process. Do you see a process property component over here? Included. It is there or not?
Yes, it is there. S3
It is
bucket.
there, right? And there is a version also. So the point I'm trying to say is that process property component is not deployed individually. A version of it will be used with the deployment. Yesterday we saw another component, right, which can be deployed individually. Which one is that?
Process route.
Process route. Okay, so do not get confused. Process route can be deployed individually, but process property component cannot be deployed individually. So whatever was the latest version, that will be taken along with the deployment. So now let's say you make some changes in the process property and you want those latest changes to be affected in your code or to be visible in your code. So we'll have to do a redeployment, right? Yes or no? You'll have to do, because it is taking a snapshot of a specific version and it is kind of creating a package out of that. So whenever you're confused, see the package, see what all is included in that, and that will give you a clarity whether I will need a redeployment or not. So that's pretty much about it. Please try it out. Okay, things which look so simple while I am doing it may not be so simple when you do it, because I've been doing it for a while. But yeah, it's not so tough, but yeah, you have to give it a try. So that's pretty much from my side today, for today, guys. Let's catch up tomorrow, same time.